The bells of the great September of Baelor tolled like iron judgments, each peal rolling over the city and into Eddard Stark's bones. He knelt on cold stone, hands bound, the weight of 1,000 eyes pressing against his back. The evening light poured over King's Landing in streams of molten gold. But here at the heart of it all, beneath the statues of the Seven, it felt like the end of the world. He could hear the murmur of the crowd, the hissed curses, the sobbing of women pressed against the cordon of gold cloaks. Somewhere in that mass of humanity his daughters stood, Sansa in silk and fear, Arya in whatever shadow she had found. He did not dare raise his head to look for them. Looking would break him, and he meant to die if death must come with what dignity remained. "Bring forth the traitor," King Joffrey Baratheon said, his thin voice cutting across the square, the high notes of a boy trying to wear a man's crown. 2 Lannister guards jerked at Eddard Stark's arms, forcing him upright. His knees ached. He had been tortured more by standing than by anything else these past days. He drew breath and tasted dust, incense, and the sour stink of fear radiating from the crowd. "I come before you to confess my treason," he began, the words Varys had urged upon him, the lies he had agreed to speak for Sansa's life, for Arya's chance to flee. The roar of the crowd swelled at the word treason. They wanted a show. Robert had given them tourneys and boar hunts. Joffrey would give them blood. Eddard forced himself onward. "I betrayed the trust of King Robert Baratheon. I plotted against his lawful son and heir, King Joffrey Baratheon. I." The name choked him like a bone. Lawful son. A lie, all of it. Yet he had chosen the lie rather than see his daughters' heads hacked from their shoulders. Honor was a cold, thin blanket to wrap around corpses. Above, on the dais, Joffrey leaned forward, pale hair gleaming in the last of the sun. "You all heard him," the boy shouted, glorying in the moment. "He admits his treason. Ser Island, bring me his head." For a heartbeat there was silence, the stillness before a lightning strike. Eddard Stark closed his eyes. He thought of Winterfell's godswood, of the sound of wind in the leaves. He thought of Jon Snow's solemn stare, of Robb's awkward pride, of Sansa's dreams and Arya's wild laughter. He thought of Catelyn's face the day he had ridden south, all tight worry and love she would not speak aloud. Chains rattled as the guards pushed him forward, down onto the block. The stone was rough beneath his cheek. He smelled old blood and oil from the sword's whetstone. The world narrowed to the texture of the stone, the muted roar of the crowd, the flutter of banners above. He whispered a prayer to the old gods, to the weirwood he had left behind. The boy king jerked his arm, eyes flashing, petulant. "I am the king," Joffrey snapped, loud enough for all to hear. "I will do as I like." Cersei's fingers dug into his wrist hard enough to bruise. Her face was composed glass, green eyes glowing with fury that had nothing to do with maternal affection. "Your Grace," she said, each word a threat behind a mask. "We had terms. Confession, service on the wall. Mercy. You cannot simply—" "Mercy is for the weak," Joffrey spat out. "He betrayed my father. He lied and schemed, and now he says he did it. The realm must see what becomes of traitors. Ser Island, do it." On the edge of the dais, Sandor Clegane shifted, the burn scars on his face twisting as if they might speak. His dark eyes flicked to Queen Cersei, then to the headsmen. Around them, the Kingsguard were statues in enameled white steel, but beneath those helmets were men, and men could hesitate. Down below, Eddard Stark lifted his head from the block. He could not see the Queen's grip on her son or the storm behind her eyes, but he heard the crack running through the moment. Hope was a dangerous thing, he fought it back. "Your Grace," Varys murmured from behind the king, soft as silk sliding over bare skin. "A living Eddard Stark on the wall is more useful than a dead one rotting on a spike. The North is restless. His son marches. Show them your mercy. The singers will say you spared his life when you might have taken it." Joffrey turned on him, lip curling. "You want me to show weakness? I want you to show wisdom." Varys said, and his lashes lowered just enough to hide his thoughts. Your grandfather Tywin Lannister has sent word. He counsels that a headsman's axe cannot knit a broken kingdom. A Stark in black would be a clearer sign you hold his fate in your hands. The name Tywin gave the boy pause. Power lived in that name as surely as in any crown. Cersei seized the opening, leaning in close to her son's ear, her voice a hiss meant for him alone but carried by the hush spreading through the dais. Listen to your counsel, she said. Kill him now and the North will never bend. Keep him and we have a hostage in all but name. Let him rot on the edge of the world. Let the Snows have him. Joffrey's nostrils flared. Below, the crowd shifted, uncertain. What is it? Someone shouted. Is he dead or not? Sansa Stark stood at the base of the steps, flanked by Septas and Lannister guards, hands clenched in her skirts. She had been praying without words, chanting inside her skull, "Don't kill him, don't kill him, don't kill him," so hard that she almost did not hear when Joffrey stamped his foot and threw out his arm. Fine, the Boy King said. If everyone is so afraid of one old man's blood, let it be on your heads. Eddard Stark, for your treason, I spare your life. He shouted the words, enjoying the shape they made. You will take the black and serve the Night's Watch until the day you die. You will never again hold lands or titles. From this day you are no lord, no hand, no Stark. You are nothing. Take him away. The crowd's roar broke like a wave on rock. Some jeered, disappointed to lose their blood sport. Others shouted for mercy or justice. A ragged cheer went up from a knot of northern merchants, quickly stifled by the butts of gold cloak spears. Hands dragged Eddard Stark to his feet. His legs trembled, dizzy with the shift from death to life, from ending to exile. He lifted his gaze at last. Above, Sansa stared at him with tear-filled eyes, lips parted in shock. She half reached for him before a Septa caught her arm. Their gazes met, and in her face he saw not the little girl who had begged to come south, but a stranger forged in fear and courtly lies. He wanted to speak to her, to say forgive me, or I'm sorry, or be brave, little bird, but the words would not come. Guards shoved him forward. Somewhere, hidden in the press and stink, a skinny girl with tangled hair watched with wolf-bright eyes. Arya Stark's hand clenched on the hilt of a little sword she didn't yet know how to use. She saw her father dragged away alive and swallowed a cry she would have screamed if she'd seen his head roll instead. The shape of her path bent, a road not taken. Eddard Stark was hauled down the steps of the Great September as the bells tolled on, their song now less a requiem than a verdict. Live, but live in chains. The cells beneath the red keep smelled of piss, mold, and despair. Eddard Stark had already grown acquainted with them. His knees complained as the guards shoved him back into the familiar darkness, chains rattling, the iron door slamming shut like a final word. For a time he simply sat, back pressed to the damp stone, feeling his heart beat the way it had when he'd heard Robert speak of Lyanna on his deathbed. Live. The command rang in his ears, not from Joffrey's lips but his own, spoken in the silent places. Live, no matter the shame, because your life is the coin that might yet buy your children's. The hatch clanged open. Lord Stark, a soft voice said. I have no lordship now, Eddard replied. His voice sounded strange to him, scraped raw. Only chains. Varys slipped through the door like a shadow in silk, the torch in his hand painting his hairless head in flickers of gold. The guards remained outside. Varys had no need of protection here. You have your life, the eunuch said mildly. That is more than can be said for many who cross Queen Cersei Lannister. Spare me your flattery, Eddard muttered. You spared my neck today. Why? Varys folded his hands over his belly. I prefer to think that I spared the realm, he said. The north is a long way from King's Landing, but its anger travels swiftly with ravens. A dead wolf makes other wolves howl. Caged one. He tipped his head. A caged one can sometimes be coaxed to wag its tail. Eddard gave a short, humorless laugh. You don't know wolves, Spider. On the contrary, I have made a life studying the beasts who stalk these halls. Varys said. You will go to the wall. There you will be contained. Your son will hear of your life and not your death. Perhaps his fury will cool. Robb will not forget, Eddard said, and a flicker of pride warmed the words. He is his mother's son that way. His smile faded as quickly as it had come. You bargain with lives as pieces on a Syvas board, all for the good of the realm. But you must know this. The realm is ruled now by a boy who thinks mercy is weakness and cruelty is sport. Varys's eyes glimmered in the torchlight. Boys grow, he said softly, and sometimes they break and something new is made from the pieces. We live in interesting times, Lord St. Eddard. The gods are moving their stones as well, it seems. Dragons stir in the east. In the north, winter gathers its strength. Spare me your riddles, Eddard said. Pain lanced his leg as he shifted. They tell me I am to take the black, to stand beside my bastard son and swear vows to protect a realm that murdered my king and will likely murder my children. Tell me why I should go. Because your children still breathe, Varys said, and for once the mask slipped and there was something like sincerity in his eyes. Because Sansa Stark will be safer as the daughter of a disgraced Night's Watch brother than of a dead traitor. Because the game is not yet finished. Pieces can move from the wall as well as from King's Landing. Eddard stared up at him. In his mind he saw Jon Snow's face, 14 and solemn, asking if a man could still be brave when he was afraid. What you mean, he said slowly, is that you want a Stark where the world ends, to watch whatever comes from the snow, to warn you. Varys inclined his head. I want many things, he said, but I think the wall will need men like you, and perhaps the boy. A bastard may rise higher there than any great lord. The thought twisted unexpectedly in Eddard's chest. Jon, freed from the stain of bastardy, judged only on his worth. A place where name mattered less than sword and will. It was a cruel gift, but a gift nonetheless. If I go, he said, I go as a brother, not your creature. Of course, Varys murmured, as if such a distinction mattered. I only ask that if, when you see something that threatens us all, you remember that there are still those in King's Landing who would choose the realm over a single king. He set the torch in a bracket. You leave at dawn. I would advise you to sleep. It is a long road north. Sleep, Eddard thought when the door had closed again. He did not know if he would ever truly sleep again. He wrapped his arms around himself, closed his eyes, and listened to the muffled heart of the castle beating above, wondering how long before its stones would fall. Dawn came in thin strands of gray, dragging the city with it. The Red Keep was a silhouette against a paling sky, its towers like finger bones reaching toward a sun that had not yet gathered the courage to rise. They put a hood over Eddard Stark's head when they led him from the dungeons. The rough fabric smelled of sweat and fear, but he welcomed the darkness. He counted his steps, the stairs they climbed, the echoing corridors, the way the sounds changed when they passed under an arch and into open air. Seabirds cried somewhere ahead, shrill and hungry. The hood came off only when he stumbled on a cobble and nearly fell. A guard cursed, yanking him upright. Careful, the man muttered. If you break your neck now, they'll have mine. They stood at the riverside, on a stone quay slick with last night's rain. A squat river galley rocked against the pilings, its hull stained black, its single mast bare of banners. The only color was in the cloaks of the few men gathered near the gangplank. Black wool, worn and patched, the sigil of a crowned stag crudely painted over on one man's shield. Ned! The gravel in the voice was familiar even after all these years. Eddard turned. Yoren of the Night's Watch looked older than he remembered from his brief visits to Winterfell. Gray threaded through his tangled hair, but his eyes were the same, sharp, cynical, weighing value in every man. Beside him, another man stood a pace back, tall, broad-shouldered, with the look of a soldier grown into an officer. A crow's feather was pinned to his doublet beneath a travel-stained cloak. Lord Stark, the tall man said. He sounded strange saying it, as if tasting the title and finding it sour. I am Ser Otten Withers. I serve the Night's Watch. By command of the Iron Throne, and with the acceptance of Lord Commander Jeor Mormont, we are here to take you north to Castle Black. Eddard inclined his head, feeling the weight of the chains run down his arms. Then let us be about it, he said. I have no wish to linger. From high above, on a balcony carved like lace, Sansa Stark clutched the stone rail until her fingers ached. She had begged her mother to let her come, but Catelyn was in the Riverlands with Robb, and it was a Lannister guard who had, after much weeping, allowed her this vantage to see her father depart. He looked smaller from here. Not the towering figure who had loomed in her childhood stories, sword on his hip and wind in his hair, but a man bowed by chains and the long fall from hand of the king to traitor in black. She wanted to scream that it was all wrong, that he was a good man, that he had only ever tried to do what was right. But the city had a way of swallowing protests. Her words would sink into the bricks and be devoured. The ship's crew moved with practiced economy, casting off lines, checking oars. Yoren clasped Eddard's arm briefly before the guards pushed him up the gangplank. I'll look out for the girls if I can, the recruiter muttered. The little one, at least. She's a quick one. Arya, Eddard said, the name a stone in his throat. If you see Jon Snow, tell him I did what I could. Yoren's face softened in some place buried deep beneath grime and wear. I'll tell him you're coming, he said. That's more than any of us hoped yesterday. The galley's deck creaked underfoot. Chains clinked as Eddard was led to a bench near the stern, where a post waited to take his irons. He sat back to the river, facing the city that had tried to kill him. The Red Keep rose above the lower city like a promise and a threat. Far beyond, the faintest strip of green hinted at the Kingswood. As the ship pushed off, as oars bit into the turgid water, Eddard Stark let his eyes climb the path of stone up to that distant balcony. For a moment he thought he saw a flash of auburn hair, the pale oval of a girl's face. He could not be sure. He raised his shackled hands as far as they would go. On the balcony, Sansa lifted her own hand, a small, helpless gesture, fingers spread toward the river. The distance between them was already more than leagues. The galley slipped into the current. King's Landing receded by slow degrees, its walls and towers diminishing. Eddard watched until the city was only a broken line against the horizon, the Sept's marble dome a pale blister in the light. He had ridden south as Warden of the North, Lord of Winterfell, Hand of the King. He rode the river north as nothing but a man in chains. Somewhere ahead lay snow and silence and a black wall that had always been a story told by fireside. Somewhere ahead, his bastard son waited, believing his father dead. It was a strange thing to be resurrected as shame. Days on the river bled together. Morning mists burned away into flat gray light. Evenings smoldered into chill dusk. The men of the Night's Watch were not given to chatter. They worked the oars in silence, eyes on the water. Now and then Yoren would trade a comment with the captain or spit over the side. But for the most part, the journey was made in a mutter of wood and water and the occasional creak of leather. Eddard Stark found his sea legs quickly enough. He had sailed before. White Harbor's harbor was no stranger to Winterfell's lord. But there, the air had smelled of salt and fish and distant ice. Here it was mud and rot and the hint of something festering downriver in the belly of the capital. He sat with his back to the mast during the day, moving as little as he could to conserve strength. The chains chafed at his wrists. His leg, never fully healed since the fight with Jaime Lannister, ached in the damp. Others might have used the time to sleep. He used it to think. He thought of Catelyn, somewhere in the Riverlands, riding with their son. Did she know he lived? Ravens could be fast, but war-tangled roads and skies alike. Perhaps, even now, she was grieving a dead husband while he sat here, useless as any old sword left out in the rain. He thought of Robb, of the boy's earnest face set in lines too stern for his years. King in the north, the lords were calling him. It was a heavy crown, forged in blood and grief. Eddard's hand twitched in its chain, wanting to reach across the miles and take that weight away. He thought most of all of Jon Snow. Jon had always carried himself like someone fighting an invisible battle. Not against the world's scorn, bastards grew accustomed to that early, but against his own sense of unworthiness. Eddard had seen it in the way the boy reached so hungrily for any scrap of approval, any nod from Ser Roderick Castle or Benjen Stark. And he had seen, too late, how his own silence had fed that hunger. I should have told him more, he thought, not for the first time. Not the truth. He still held that secret in a clenched fist around Lyanna's last breath. But something. That he was wanted. That he was loved. That his worth did not lie in the name he did not bear. The wall had been Jon's escape, a place where his bastard's shame could be turned into honor. Now it would be Eddard's prison. There was a bitter symmetry in that. "Thought you might like to know," Yoren said one afternoon, dropping down beside him and scratching idly at his beard. "Your boy's done well up there, from what I've heard. Jon Snow took to the sword and the training, made friends, enemies too, but that's life." Eddard looked at him. "You've seen him?" "Not for a bit," Yoren shrugged. "But word travels. Ravens carry tales as well as messages. Mormont likes him. Says he's got the makings of something. If the lad doesn't get himself killed trying to save fools who don't want his saving." The corner of Eddard's mouth twitched. "That does sound like him. Day you rode south," Yoren added. "He watched you go from the battlements. Looked like he'd swallowed a live coal. You broke something in that boy when you left him, Stark. Maybe you'll mend it now." "I broke something when I kept too many words behind my teeth," Eddard said. The river's gray surface rippled beneath them, hiding what lay unseen. "If the gods are giving me a chance to do better, I mean to take it." Yoren spat into the water. "You talk like a man who thinks he's got time," he said. "The world's changing faster than you know. There's dead things walking in the snow, if half what I've heard is true. Dragons hatching in the east, so they say. Men calling themselves king in every bloody direction." Eddard considered the sweep of the sky, the low press of clouds. "Then we shall have to change with it," he said quietly, "or be swept aside." Far to the north, beyond sight and sound, Jon Snow stood atop a wall of ice and watched Ravenswell against a bleached sky, never knowing that a ship was carrying his father toward him, or that the shape of his life was about to twist into something new and terrible. The river narrowed, the land rising on either side, trees gathering thick and dark. The air cooled. The south fell away behind them like a fever dream. Ahead loomed the hard lines of the north, and beyond them a horizon made not of trees or hills, but of an endless white wall that had waited, patient as stone, for thousands of years. The wall was a living thing. Jon Snow had come to believe that in the months since he'd taken his vow. It groaned and shifted in the night, deep echoes moving through its heart like the sigh of some ancient beast turning in its sleep. It caught the light in strange ways. Sometimes it seemed to drink in the stars, other times to throw them back sharpened and cold. Tonight it loomed over Castle Black in shades of blue and gray, its surface veined with shadows. The air stung Jon's cheeks and nose. He pulled his cloak tighter around him and let his gloved hand rest on Ghost's head. The direwolf's white fur blended nearly seamlessly into the snow at their feet, but his red eyes burned like coals. "Do you smell it too?" Jon asked quietly. Ghost made a low sound in his throat. Jon did not know if it was a scent, warning, or merely some private response to the wind. The direwolf sensed things he did not. Men's moods, the approach of storms, sometimes the edge of danger before any human ear caught a sound. "Lord Snow," a halting voice said behind him. Jon sighed. "Samwell Tarly," he replied without turning. "I told you you don't have to call me that." Sam came to stand beside him, cheeks flushed from the climb up to the top of the wall, breath puffing out in little clouds. "You're the steward to Lord Commander Jeor Mormont," he said, pushing his round spectacles up his nose. "You're as close to a lord as we have up here." "I'm the bastard son of Eddard Stark," Jon said. "Black or not, that's all." Sam shifted his weight from foot to foot. "A raven came," he blurted. "From the south. Maester Aemon sent me to fetch you." Jon's heart paused, then hammered. From Winterfell? I don't know, Sam stammered. He didn't say, only that you were to come. At once. Jon laid a hand on Ghost's neck. Stay, he told the direwolf and walked toward the stairs. The descent from the wall's height to the courtyard always felt like coming down from another world. Up above, the sky seemed vaster, the world reduced to white and blue and the hard black line of the forest. Below, Castle Black was all mud and wood and smoke, the stink of men and horses, the clatter of steel. Maester Aemon waited in his chambers, wrapped in furs, his blind eyes milk blue behind the thin skin of his lids. A raven perched on the iron rung above his head, feathers ruffled, beak sharp and impatient. Jon Snow, the old man said as Jon entered, as if he could see him plain. You are thinking of leaving us. The words made Jon stop short. No, he lied automatically. He thought of Robb, of the banners called, of the North marching to war. He thought of letters smuggled in by sympathetic hands, telling of his brother named King in the North. He thought of his father's head on a spike above the Red Keep. He corrected himself harshly. Every raven that flies from the south brings you news of home, Maester Aemon said. His gnarled fingers brushed the message tube at the bird's leg. And with every scrap of ink and parchment, your heart pulls in two directions. Jon swallowed. Is it from Winterfell? He asked hoarsely. From King's Landing, Aemon said. Sit, boy. I am old, and my bones ache. Let me not crane my neck while I speak doom and reprieve in the same breath. Jon sat, feeling clumsy, suddenly 14 again. The raven clicked its beak and shifted on its perch. The message is for the Lord Commander, Maester Aemon said. And for the sake of your vows, I should perhaps not share its contents with you. But there are other vows older than black cloth. Blood and the duties of a father. Commander Mormont has gone to see to the winch. He bid me tell you. Tell me what? The room seemed to tilt. Ghost was surely somewhere outside, near enough that Jon could feel the faint tug of his presence. Steadied him. That your father did not die at the great September of Baelor, Maester Aemon said. Eddard Stark lives. King Joffrey Baratheon has spared his life. He rides to the wall to take the black. For a moment Jon thought he had misheard, that the old man's voice had tangled in the air. The images he had been living with since his own knighting into the Watch. His father on the steps of the Sept, sword falling, blood splashing white marble, shattered and reformed. Lives? Jon repeated, the word strange in his mouth. My father lives. Yes, Aemon said. There was something like pity in the old man's sightless eyes. Sooner than you think. You will have to look at him in black and call him brother. Jon surged to his feet, fists clenching and unclenching. 100 feelings warred in him. Joy, shock, anger at having been left to mourn a death that had not happened. Confusion at the notion of his Lord Father kneeling beside him in a drafty hall. His name stripped away. He took the black? Jon began, then stopped. No, Eddard Stark had not chosen this. It was another punishment in gold and crimson cloth. I don't understand, he admitted, sounding younger than he liked. Why would they send him here? Maester Aemon's mouth tightened. The wall has always been a place to put inconvenient men, he said. Bastards, second sons. Prisoners given a choice between the axe and the cold. Once it was an honor. Now it is a convenient oubliette for those whom the powerful are not quite ready to kill. Jon thought of his father trapped in that place, surrounded by men who had no idea what kind of wolf had come among them. He doesn't belong here, he whispered, before he could stop himself. Maester Aemon lifted his head, blind eyes seeking Jon's face. Neither do you, he said gently. But here you are. The wall has a way of changing men. It may change him too, or perhaps he will change it. The gods have strange humors. Jon did not sleep that night. He stood at the base of the wall, hand on rough ice, eyes turned south. Somewhere out there, on a road he had never seen, his father was riding toward him. The boy who had left Winterfell as a bastard, and a dreamer felt something inside him stir, like a sword being drawn slowly from a sheath. The day Eddard Stark rode into Castle Black, the sky was the color of old steel. The wind worried at cloaks and banners, slipping cold fingers down necks. The brothers of the Night's Watch gathered in the yard out of curiosity more than ceremony. New recruits were not uncommon, but new recruits in chains, escorted by a knight in half-polished plate and a ragged recruiter who smelled of horse and stranger lands, that drew eyes. Jon Snow stood near the steps to the Lord Commander's hall, Ghost at his side. The direwolf's hackles were raised, his nose twitching. Jon heard the gates creak, the crunch of hooves on packed snow. His heart thudded high and hard in his throat. The lead rider was Ser Otten Withers, helm tucked under his arm, hair wind-whipped, face set in lines of bored strain. Behind him came Yoren, hunched in his saddle as if the weight of the world were pushing him down. Between them, on a plain brown horse, rode a man in black. For a heartbeat, Jon thought it must be a trick of the light or his own longing painting familiar shapes where none existed. The rider's shoulders were hunched, his hair threaded with more gray than Jon remembered, his beard fuller. Chains manacled his wrists, gleaming dully in the gray light. But when the man swung down from the saddle, favoring one leg, when he straightened with a soft, involuntary grunt of pain, when he lifted his head, the world narrowed like the throat of a bottle. His father's face was leaner than in Jon's memory. The skin at the corners of his eyes creased deeper. There was a scar on his brow Jon did not remember, a pale line disappearing into his hair. But his eyes were the same, gray as the winter sea, steady as a drawn bowstring. By the Seven, one of the Black brothers muttered nearby, "That's Eddard Stark." Was, someone else whispered. "He's no lord now." Jon did not hear them. His feet moved of their own accord, carrying him across the yard. He was vaguely aware of Ghost keeping pace, a white shadow at his knee. Eddard Stark's gaze swept the yard, taking in the rough timbers, the looming wall, the cluster of men. It settled on Jon like the weight of the world. "Jon," he said. The name felt like a benediction and a wound. "Father," Jon managed. His throat was dry. They stood a pace apart, staring at one another, the yard around them blurring into nothing. 1,000 words vied for Jon's tongue. "Why didn't you tell me you lived? Why did you let me believe you were dead? Why did you never tell me who my mother was? Why did you let me go?" What came out instead was simple and small. "You're here." Eddard Stark's mouth twitched in something that might have been the ghost of a smile. "So I am," he said. "It seems I am to be your brother now." Ghost crept forward, tail low, ears pricked. He sniffed at Eddard's hand, then snorted softly, as if recognizing some scent buried under weeks of travel and prison. Eddard's fingers, still bound, brushed against the direwolf's fur. For a moment, something eased in his face. "You've grown," he said to Jon, as if they had parted only months ago and not in a lifetime measured in deaths and wars. "The black suits you less than wolf gray, but it fits all the same." "I thought you were dead," Jon blurted. They told us," they said. "I know what they said," Eddard cut in gently, glancing around at the watching brothers. "This is not the place for it." Jeor Mormont emerged from the hall then, cloak swirling, his great bear of a frame filling the doorway. "Lord Stark," he said in a voice that carried. "Or do we call you something else now?" "Call me Eddard," Ned said. The name felt strange on his tongue without title, but there was a rough freedom in it too. "I have come to swear my vows if you'll have me. We take all men, so long as they are sound enough to swing a sword," Mormont said. His eyes flicked to Jon. "You'll have time to reacquaint yourselves later. For now, the king's decree has been read. The Night's Watch takes no part in the quarrels of the realm. You're crows now, both of you." Eddard gave the Lord Commander a short bow. "Then let us see to these chains," he said. "I'd rather my vows were spoken with my hands free." They cleansed him in scalding water before they put him in black. The steam rose in clouds in the dim bathhouse, fogging the air and blurring the lines of men's bodies. Eddard Stark scrubbed at weeks of dungeon filth until his skin flushed raw. Scars long forgotten showed pale against the reddened flesh. Souvenirs from battles past, hunts gone awry, training yard mishaps with Brandon long ago. A boy younger than Jon brought him the black wool. It was rougher than the fabrics he'd once worn, but no worse than what Winterfell's men-at-arms used to don in winter. He pulled on the tunic, the cloak, feeling like a man dressing for his own funeral. Death of a lord, birth of a brother. In the common hall, the air was thick with smoke and the smell of stew, onions and barley, and something that might have been mutton if one were generous. Brothers gathered along the walls, murmuring. Speculation crackled like dry kindling. Eddard felt their eyes on him, their curiosity, their resentment, their hope. Men had long memories. Some of these had served under his banners once, or under lords who owed allegiance to Winterfell. Jeor Mormont stood at the front of the hall, a great bear wrapped in a black cloak. "We have among us a man of some reputation," the old commander said, voice roughened by years and cold. "But the wall knows no lords. We are all crows here." His gaze flicked from face to face. "Eddard of House Stark has been condemned by the Iron Throne and sent to us in chains. He has asked to take the black. The question before us is simple. Do we accept him as a brother?" A murmur ran through the room. Bowen Marsh shifted uneasily beside the Lord Commander, mustache twitching. "We take poachers and rapers," he said under his breath, not quite soft enough. "Now traitors too. Better a traitor in black than a rebel in the field," another man muttered. Jon stood near the back, ghost pressed against his leg, heart beating fast. It seemed absurd for there to be a question. The Watch took all men. They had taken him, had taken Samwell Tarly, had taken the dregs of half a kingdom. To refuse his father now would be to admit that this place remembered the Game of Thrones it pretended to ignore. Eddard stepped forward. "I was sent here as punishment," he said, voice carrying clearly. "The king would see me cut off from my lands, my name, my blood. But the wall is more than a prison. You all know it. You men hold the line between this realm and whatever lies in the dark beyond. I have seen enough of kings and their courts to know which duty is the heavier. If you will have me, I will serve that duty as best I can, as a brother and as a soldier. If you will not," he smiled faintly, though there was no humor in it, "I suppose I will stand on the southern side of your gate until Winter or the Lannisters kill me. It will not take long." A few snorts of laughter broke the tension. Mormont's beard twitched. "We need swords," the Lord Commander said simply. "We need men who can lead. I won't pretend the politics of it don't worry me. There are those who'll say we've taken sides just by letting him don the black. But the White Walkers won't care for gold lions or flayed men. All they'll see is the warmth of the flesh they want to freeze." He picked up the dagger from the table. "Come then, speak your words." Eddard Stark approached, each step a quiet act of will. Jon watched the way his father's shoulders squared, the way he placed his hand on the cold steel. "Night gathers, and now my watch begins," Eddard said. His voice did not shake. "It shall not end until my death." The words rolled out, ancient and familiar. Jon had spoken them himself not long ago, heart pounding, the future a fog of snow and possibility. Hearing them now in his father's voice twisted something in him. The vow was a severing, a binding to a new family. Eddard was cutting himself free from Winterfell, from Catelyn and Robb and Sansa and the girls, from all that had defined him. He does this because he must, Jon thought. For us, for me. "And now my watch begins," Eddard finished. For a heartbeat, silence held. Then Jeor Mormont nodded. "Rise, brother." When Eddard straightened, there was a subtle change in the air, felt rather than seen. The men around him did not quite know how to adjust their gazes. Was he a lord, a traitor, a brother, a relic? He was all and none. Jon stepped forward, heart in his mouth. "Brother," he said, trying the word out, seeing how it fit between them, felt too small and too large all at once. Eddard's eyes met his. "Jon," he said quietly. and there was something in his gaze now that had not been there in King's Landing. An acknowledgement, a question, and the barest outline of a plan. The climb up the wall left Eddard's leg throbbing. The old injury, foolishly earned in a street brawl with Jaime Lannister's men, protested every rung of the icy ladder. He gritted his teeth and forced himself upward. Pride alone would not have been enough. The need to show Jon that he was not yet broken carried him the last few yards. At the top, the world opened up. The wind hit him like a wave, cold enough to burn. He staggered, caught himself, and stepped onto the crunchy surface of packed snow. The wall stretched in both directions, a frozen highway to nowhere. Below, to the south, the lights of Castle Black were pinpricks in the dark, the buildings pressed like children's toys against the colossal bulk of the ice. To the north, there was nothing but darkness and the faint suggestion of shapes. Trees, hills, the hint of movement if one stared too long. Jon Snow stood near the edge, cloak snapping. Ghost sat at his feet, a pale sentinel. The boy, no, the young man, turned as Eddard approached, his face thrown into hard lines by moonlight. He looked older up here somehow, as if the altitude shaved years off foolishness and left only bone and will. "You shouldn't be up here with that leg," Jon said. There was concern in his tone, awkwardly concealed under brusqueness. Eddard snorted. "I won't have my son thinking me a cripple before I'm ready to admit it," he said. He came to stand beside Jon, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. The cold seeped through his cloak, but there was a peculiar clarity in it, as if the air had been scraped clean of southern perfumed lies. For a time they simply stood, saying nothing, their breaths white in the dark. Ghost's ears flicked, listening to things beyond human hearing. "When I was a boy," Jon said finally, "I used to dream of this place, the wall. I'd imagine it taller than any castle, colder than any winter in Winterfell. I thought if I came here, if I took the Black, I'd be free." "Free of what?" Eddard asked quietly, already knowing the answer. "Of being a bastard," Jon said. His laugh held no humor. "Here I thought no one would care. We'd all be the same. Brothers. It hasn't quite worked out that way." "No," Eddard agreed. "Men carry their old scars wherever they go, and they make new ones for company." He glanced sideways at Jon. "But you were not wrong to come. There is a kind of freedom here that Winterfell could never have given you." Jon turned to look at him more fully. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked bluntly. "That you lived, that you were coming, any of it." "I did not know I lived until the sword failed to fall," Eddard said, remembering the chill of the stone beneath his cheek. "They kept me in the dark in more ways than one." By the time the sentence was changed, events were moving too swiftly for letters to outrun them. He paused, then added, "And there are things I have not said for 14 years that I cannot untangle in a single night on a wall of ice." Jon's jaw tightened. "You promised me once that we would speak of my mother," he said, voice low, "before you left Winterfell. Then you rode south and I came here and you died. I buried that promise with you. Now you stand beside me and tell me there are more secrets. How am I to trust anything you say?" The words cut, but Eddard did not flinch. He had earned them. "You are to trust this," he said, "that I have always thought of your safety before your pride. That the truth I kept was not kept from you out of shame, but out of fear of what others might do with it. There are names in your blood that can topple thrones, Jon. I could not risk them while you were a boy in a world ruled by men like Cersei Lannister." Jon stared at him, breath coming fast. "What are you saying?" Eddard looked north into the black. "I am saying that you are more than what they have called you," he said slowly. "But I am also saying that the wall is no place for crowns. Not yet. The dead walk if what your Lord Commander tells me is true. Wildlings stir. We cannot afford to play at kingship when the world itself is turning." He turned back to Jon, meeting his eyes squarely. "So here is what I propose. For now, you are Jon Snow, brother of the Night's Watch, steward to Jeor Mormont. I am Eddard, once of House Stark, now your fellow Crow. We will do our duty, to this wall, to the men who stand beside us, to the realm that lies sleeping behind us. In the doing of that duty, I will teach you what I can of ruling. Not thrones and crowns, those are trappings. Ruling men, ruling yourself, making hard choices and living with them. And later, Jon asked. The wind tugged at his hair. After the dead, after the wildlings, after whatever comes? Later, Eddard said, we will see what remains of this realm. And if then there is still a need for a man who knows both ice and fire, both north and south. He hesitated. The words tasted like treason even up here. Then we will speak of what you truly are. Ghost looked up at them, red eyes gleaming. Far below, something howled in the darkness, thin and distant. Jon swallowed. You mean to train me, he said slowly, not just as a brother, as a king. As a man, Eddard corrected. If you cannot rule yourself, you will rule no one long. Kingship is not a destiny to be grasped like a sword hilt. It is a burden that may be laid on your shoulders whether you will it or no. I mean to see that, if that day comes, you will not be crushed beneath it. Jon looked out over the frozen forest. All my life, he said, I wanted a name, to be Jon Stark, to be legitimate. Now you stand here and hint at something even larger, and I'm supposed to pretend it doesn't exist. You are supposed to learn, Eddard said, to watch, to judge, to lead men in small things so that, if larger things come, you will not falter. It is a harder path than any I have walked, but I will walk it with you as far as I am able. The wind tore at the words, but teach. Why settled in Jon's chest like stones. Duty thrummed through him, the old duty of the night's watch, and this new, heavier one his father was laying upon him. Brother, bastard, maybe more. He exhaled, seeing the breath plume out into the night. Very well, he said. Teach me, then. The silence that followed was not empty. It was thick with possibility, with the faint scrape of fate reshuffling its pieces on some unseen board. Eddard Stark studied his son's profile. The boy's cheekbones were sharper than he remembered, the jaw more defined. There was weariness in the set of his shoulders, a kind of steel that only hard living and hard choices forged. This was no longer the lad who had stood by the gate at Winterfell, eyes shining with the notion of black as a path to honor. The watch had taken that boy and carved a man out of him. Good, Eddard thought. Better he learn from cold and necessity than from soft pillows and whispers. A king shaped only by comfort is a blade made of tin. I failed you, he said abruptly. The words surprised even him. In Winterfell, I thought I was protecting you by keeping silent. Now I see that in trying to spare you pain, I left you to wrestle ghosts alone. Jon blinked, eyes glinting. You were my father, he said. That was enough. No, Eddard said. It was what you had. It was not enough. When we are not needed on the wall every waking moment, I will tell you more. Of your mother, of the promises I made. But you must be ready, Jon. Once the truth is spoken, it cannot be taken back. Jon nodded slowly. Then teach me to be ready. Eddard felt something ease inside him. A knot tied 14 years ago loosening by a fraction. He had lived his life by rules. Honor, duty, the North's quiet codes. In King's Landing, those rules had been broken against golden lies. Here, on a wall of ice older than any kingdom, he would have to forge new ones. Very well, he said. Tomorrow you will accompany me when I speak to Lord Commander Jeor Mormont about the state of our stores, our men, our defenses. You will say nothing unless spoken to. You will watch. You will listen. You will notice who speaks up and who keeps their counsel, who chafes under orders and who accepts them too easily. Ruling begins with listening. Jon made a face. That sounds dull. It is, Eddard said. Most of ruling is. War is a fever. It burns bright and fast. Governing is the long shivering afterward, when the body tries to heal. He looked north again. You must know both if you are to be of any use in the world to come. The world to come, Jon echoed, tasting the words. Beyond the wall, The haunted forest shifted in its sleep. Somewhere out there, cold blue eyes were opening. Do you truly think this king you hint at, this more, do you think it will ever happen? I think the world is tearing itself apart, Eddard said quietly. When it is done, when the dead are sent back to their graves and the living have counted their losses, someone will have to pick up the pieces. It would be better if that someone were a man who has stood on this wall, who has broken bread with wildlings and southrons, who has seen both the lion's den and the wolf's den and found them wanting. He let the thought hang. Perhaps that man will be you. Perhaps it will not. The gods have not seen fit to share their plans with me. All I can do is make you ready, so that if the moment comes, you will not look back on this night and wish you had learned more. Jon's mouth curved in something like a smile. Always with the heavy lessons, father. Always with the stubborn questions, Jon Snow, Eddard replied, and for a moment they were back in Winterfell's yard. A boy sparring with wooden swords and a man correcting his stance. Ghost rose, circling their legs, brushing his fur against them both. The dire wolf lifted his head and howled. A long, low sound that rolled out over the ice and into the dark. Far to the south, banners snapped in winter winds as men marched and died for thrones of wood and iron. Far to the east, dragons circled beneath alien stars. Here, on the edge of the world, a fallen lord and his bastard son stood together and began a different kind of war. One not of swords and sieges, but of lessons and choices. The wind tore at their cloaks. The wall groaned deep in its frozen heart. And in that cold, thin air, Eddard Stark began, at last, to do what he had never been given time to do in the warm halls of Winterfell or the poisoned courts of King's Landing. He began to teach Jon Snow how to rule. The hall smelled of smoke, wet wool, and boiled onions. It always did, but tonight the stink felt sharper, as if the air itself bristled at the gathering of men. The long table at the center was pitted and scarred by years of fists and knives, spilt ale and spilt ink. On it lay a rough-spun map of the lands south of the wall, stones and knife points holding its curling corners down. Lord Commander Jeor Mormont leaned over that map, thick finger stabbing at a line of ink that marked the King's Road. We can't keep sending men and horses to escort every lordling who decides to ride north for a look at the bleeding edge of the world, he growled. We're not a tour. The last lordling came with wagons of grain and salt beef, Bowen Marsh said, cheeks flushed above his red mustache. If they want to gawk at the wall a bit, let them gawk. Long as they're paying in food, we don't have to beg from Eastwatch. Alliser Thorne sneered, his pale eyes flicking to Eddard Stark. Aye, and now we have a lordling that doesn't leave at all, he said. Sits at our table like a crow hatched in black, but he still smells of Southron plots to me. Enough, Mormont snapped. Eddard is a brother of the Night's Watch. He bent his knee and spoke his vows like any of you. He spoke them better, someone muttered from down the table. Laughter rustled like dry leaves. Eddard said nothing. He sat with his hands folded before him, the knuckles still faintly red where the shackles had rubbed. He watched the interplay of faces and voices, cataloging them. Bowen Marsh, anxious and practical, always counting sacks of grain. Alliser Thorne, bitter as old vinegar, forever measuring himself against the slight he'd suffered at the Trident. Othel Yarwick, thinking of timber and latrines even when war was mentioned. It was a smaller, rougher mirror of King's Landing's council table, without the jewels and perfumed courtiers, but the same currents eddied here: pride, fear, self-interest. Jon Snow stood just behind Mormont's chair, tankard in hand, ledger under his arm, eyes fixed on the men as they spoke. Eddard could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his son leaned forward unconsciously when talk turned to rangers and wildlings, to strange things glimpsed beyond the Frostfangs. We've had 3 reports now of fires in the haunted forest. Mormont's voice cut through the mutters. Not campfires, larger, smoke on the horizon at night. Wildlings are massing. Mance Rayder is not content to let us rot in peace. We knew that, Alliser said. The king beyond the wall has been stealing our deserters and runaways for years. He'll throw them at us like kindling when he's ready to light his fire. And we'll be ready, Mormont said. Or we won't, and the wall will end as a story told in taverns. I've no appetite for that ending. He looked to Eddard. You've seen war from a king's side and from a rebel's, he said. If a wildling host gathers in the forest, what would you expect them to do? Eddard weighed his words. The eyes along the table turned to him. Some hostile, some curious, a few genuinely hopeful. Jon's breath caught. Eddard heard it. They will test you, Eddard said. Probe for weakness. A raid here, a burned village there, a ranger's patrol vanishing. They'll want to know if you are a crumbling wall of old men, or a line of steel that can still bite. If they are wise, they will avoid a full assault until they are certain your strength is spent. If they are desperate, they will come sooner. You speak as if they are generals, not savages, Alistair Thorne scoffed. I have seen savages break hosts twice their size, Eddard replied calmly. Desperation teaches war to men who never studied it from a saddle. Mormont grunted. We don't have enough men for half the patrols we'd like, he said. We're short on grain, short on steel, short on everything but snow. We need to know where to place the little strength we have. Eddard's gaze flicked to Jon, then back. Then you must learn who among your brothers can lead small commands, he said. Who keeps his head when fear hits. Who can read the land and the men under him. You will need more than one mind making choices when the storm breaks. And I suppose you're volunteering your bastard to be one of them, Thorne said with a thin smile. Eddard did not look at Jon this time. I am saying that any man who is given a sword here should be made, in time, to carry more than his own weight, he said. If you would have me earn my place at this table, Lord Commander, let me help you find those men and temper them before the fire comes. Mormont's dark eyes considered him, then narrowed. We'll see, he said. For now, we have stores to count and patrols to assign. Bowen, you'll... The talk turned to numbers and names. Eddard listened, lips thinned, as the wall's frailty was laid out in ink and muttered complaints. Jon absorbed it all, brow furrowed, committing details to memory without yet knowing how to use them. This, Eddard thought, glancing at his son, is where I begin. The quarrel began over barley, as many quarrels in lean places did. It was my turn at the pot, Hareth insisted, his thin face pinched. You saw the duty roster. Bowen himself assigned it. I only took what I was owed. The hell you did, muttered Totter, twice Hareth's size. His broad hands clenched around the mouth of the burlap sack. You took more than any man has a right to with winter coming. Half that's mine. It was weighed, Hareth snapped. Ask the cook. I'll ask your teeth when I knock them out, Totter growled, yanking the bag. Grain spilled onto the packed snow like yellow rain. Men turned to watch. The wall bred boredom as much as vigilance. Any flicker of entertainment drew eyes. No one stepped in. Fights broke out often enough, and there were only so many hours in the day a man could spend breaking up other men's tempers. Jon Snow didn't think. He moved. That's enough, he said, stepping between them, hand on the hilt of Long Claw. You'll waste more barley on the ground than either of you will ever eat if you keep tugging like that. Stay out of this, Lord Snow, Totter muttered, but his grip slackened a fraction. Jon's presence carried the weight of the Lord Commander's favor, and even stubborn men recognized that weight. I can't stay out of it, Jon said. Not when you're spilling supper onto the ice. You want to fight, hit each other, not the food. Hareth flushed, eyes flicking to the ring of watching brothers. Shame, not anger, tightened his jaw now. I'm hungry, he said. We all are. He took more than his share. You gonna tell me that's right, Snow? Jon felt the familiar pull, the desire to make a quick judgment, to side with the smaller man against the larger, to soothe things with a joke or a command. Behind him, he could feel another gaze, heavier and quieter, his father's. Eddard Stark leaned against a post near the racks of practice swords, cloak drawn close, the picture of a man merely resting his leg. But his eyes were sharp and intent. Jon knew he was being weighed. "Where's the roster?" Jon asked. Hareth blinked. "In the kitchens." "Then we'll go to the kitchens," Jon said. "And we'll ask the cook how much each man was given, and we'll weigh what's left in your bag. If you've taken more Hareth, you'll give it back and take a turn at latrines for a week. If you haven't, Totter, you'll apologize and take his name off whatever list you've scratched into your skull." Totter's jaw worked. "You'd have us traipse to the kitchens for a handful of barley? I'd have you learn that food is worth more than pride up here," Jon said. "Move." He herded them toward the kitchens, Ghost padding behind, sniffing at the dropped grain but not eating it. The dire wolf seemed to understand, in his animal way, that some things were not to be wasted. The watching brothers drifted back to their tasks, muttering. In the heat of the kitchen, with steam rising from enormous iron pots, the matter became clearer. The roster showed Hareth's name. The cook, a sour man with a constellation of burns on his arms, swore that he had weighed the ration fairly. The sack, when placed on the scale, showed that some had indeed spilled, and that what remained was less than Hareth's due, not more. Totter's cheeks grew mottled. "Thought you were nicking extra," he muttered. "You thought wrong," Jon said. "You'll sweep the hall after supper for a week to make up for the grain on the snow. And you'll apologize." Totter looked as though he'd swallowed something sharp. "Sorry," he muttered in Hareth's direction. It was not much, but it was something. Outside again, the cold hit Jon like a slap, but he welcomed it, cleared his head. He felt Eddard fall into step beside him. "You did well," his father said. Jon snorted. "I made 2 grown men walk to the kitchens because they couldn't share a bag of barley. That hardly seems kingly." "Kingly?" Eddard repeated, one eyebrow quirking. "Is that your measure now?" Heat rose in Jon's face, but he lifted his chin. "You spoke of larger things, of making me ready. Today I settled a quarrel over supper. It felt small. Most of ruling is small," Eddard said. "Food, tempers hurt pride. If you cannot show fairness in barley, how will men trust you when you speak of land and law and blood? You did not favor the weaker man simply because he was weak. You sought proof. You considered consequence. You imposed a penalty that matched the harm done, and you forced an apology without making either man feel entirely crushed." Jon thought of Totter's face. He didn't look uncrushed. "He'll grumble," Eddard said. "But the next time he thinks to snatch a sack from a thinner brother, he'll remember sweeping floors. You cannot make all men good, Jon. You can only make some choices that remind them of the cost of being worse." He paused by the practice yard, watching as a pair of young recruits swung dull blades at each other, their breath puffing in ragged bursts. "Tomorrow," he said, "you'll join me when I speak with Bowen Marsh about the winter stores. You'll ask questions. You'll listen. You'll try not to fall asleep when the talk turns to how many sacks of salt fish we have left. A king or a commander who does not know his larders is a man who will watch his people starve." Jon made a face. "Barrels and barley," he muttered. "I had hoped for more heroic lessons." "Barrels and barley are what wars are won with," Eddard said. "Swords only decide who gets to eat from them." The armory smelled of oil and old iron. Racks of spears leaned in tired ranks, their shafts worn smooth by a dozen owners. Mail shirts hung like flayed skins from wooden pegs. At the far end, barrels squatted in neat rows, their lids stamped with sigils of distant houses that had once sent their tithes more generously. Bowen Marsh hovered over a ledger as if it were a holy book. "We have 24 casks of salt beef left fit to eat," he recited, running a thick finger down a column of cramped script. 17 of fish, barley enough for 3 months at full rations. Less if we take in any more strays." "Strays," Jon repeated. "You mean men." "I mean strays," Marsh said shortly. "Thieves, rapers, poachers, whatever else the South decides to sweep under the rushes and send us as charity. They eat like men, and they fight like kittens, and they complain as if they were kings." He turned a page. "And don't speak to me of the wildlings Mormont wants to hold prisoner. Who do you think he expects to feed them? The crows, that's who. Jon glanced back at Eddard. His father's face was unreadable. He did not step in. Jon turned back to Marsh. If we don't take strays, Jon said carefully, we don't have enough men to hold the wall. And if we take too many, Marsh snapped, we don't have enough food to feed them until spring. It's a choice of which way we die first, Lord Snow. Jon let the title pass. Have you considered cutting rations now? He asked. Smaller portions stretched longer. Every brother could. Every brother already eats less than he wants, Marsh said. You try telling Big Totter and the rest that they'll get half a bowl of stew instead of a full one because some Southron lords have forgotten we exist. Some have not forgotten, Eddard said quietly at last. I know which houses in the north will answer a call, if the call is phrased correctly. But that is another day's work. For now, Jon listened to Bowen. This is what hunger looks like before it shows in men's faces. Jon breathed in the damp air, the mingled scent of leather and salt meat. If we had more wildlings on our side, he said slowly, more of them under our protection, would that not mean more hands to hunt and gather? Marsh stared at him as if he'd suggested training the rats in the cellars to carry spears. Wildlings don't gather, he said. They steal. They take. They've never tilled a field in their lives. They know how to pull down what others have built. That's all. They know the forest, Jon said. Know where the game runs, where edible roots can be dug even in winter. We don't. Not the way they do. And in exchange, Marsh said, we give them food we barely have, and trust they won't slit our throats in our sleep. Clever bargain. Eddard spoke again, more firmly. Bowen, your fears are not without merit, he said. But consider this. A hungry wildling beyond the wall will join Mance Rayder because he must. A hungry wildling at our fire, under our eye, may learn that his children survive longer here than in the snow. Men's loyalties often follow their bellies. If Jon sees a way to buy loyalties with meat we would otherwise lose to spoilage, I would hear it. Marsh scowled at both of them, but he stopped stroking the ledger as if it were a shield. Spoilage, he grumbled. Aye, there's some. Barrels at the back gone off, fish gone soft. We throw more away than I'd like. Then that is where we begin, Eddard said. Jon, in 3 days' time you will return here. You will go through the stores with Bowen. You will mark every barrel that will not keep the winter. You will suggest which might be used soonest, and whether any surplus can be spared to buy goodwill from men who know the woods better than we. You will put it in writing, and we will see whether Jeor Mormont thinks your plan worth the ink. Jon's mouth opened. I am no steward. You are a steward, Bowen snapped. Mormont's own. If you can't count onions, what good are you? And if you are to command men someday, Eddard added more softly, you must know what keeps them alive when the swords are sheathed. Go through the stores, Jon. Learn what hunger looks like before it reaches their ribs. Later, as they stepped back into the courtyard's bite, Jon muttered, I thought you'd teach me to read men's faces, to plan battles. Instead, you set me to counting fish. Eddard smiled faintly. Men's faces are easier to read than ledgers, he said. They lie less. Numbers never lie, Jon. They can be misread, twisted, but they themselves do not shift. Learn to see what they are telling you, and you'll know more of a man's realm than he does. He paused, looking up at the wall where it cut the sky. And when the time comes that you have to choose whether to send the last of your grain to a starving village or keep it for your own garrison, you'll be making that choice not from guesswork, but from knowledge. That is the difference between a hard ruler and a cruel one. The rookery was a world of wings and noise. Ravens croaked and muttered from their perches, feathers sleek and black as spilled ink. Droppings crusted the stones. The smell was sharp but clean in its own way, cutting through the mustiness that permeated so much of Castle Black. Maester Aemon stood beneath the crowded rafters like a tree in a flock, blind eyes turned toward the sound of their arrival. In his hands he held a small roll of parchment. The wax seal that had once bound it lay broken on the table, a gray direwolf running across white, smeared by old fingers. I sent for you both, Aemon said, his voice thin but steady. Word comes from the south. Jon's gaze fixed on the seal. From Winterfell? He asked, his voice catching on the word. He had been away long enough now that the castle sometimes felt more dream than memory. From the host that rides in its name, Aemon said. Your son, Lord Eddard, has made some stir in the Riverlands. The boy king in the north is no quiet cub. Eddard's hand closed at his side. The title still felt strange. King in the north. Robb, with his long face and earnest eyes, bearing a weight he had never been meant to carry. Read, Ned said. Aemon broke the simple tie that held the parchment and smoothed it with trembling fingers. It is a copy of a raven sent to the lords sworn to House Stark, he said. The original has flown gods nowhere by now, but its words have wings of their own. His clouded eyes stared somewhere over Jon's shoulder as he read. To all true and loyal men of the north, he said, and though his voice was old, there was steel in the cadence. Know that Robb Stark, by acclamation of his bannermen, has been proclaimed king in the north and Trident. Know that he rides in open war against the treacherous house of Lannister, whose false king holds his father Eddard Stark in chains and has spilt the blood of our kin. Know that the North remembers and will never bend knee again to a southern throne. Signed in the name of House Stark, by the hand of Lord Greatjon Umber, at Riverrun. The words seemed to hang in the hot, feather-filled air. Jon felt dizzy. King in the north. Robb on a throne of carved weirwood and iron, draped in wolf pelts, men pounding their spears on stone and crying his name. His brother, who had once tripped over his own feet in the training yard, now a king by acclamation and anger. Eddard said nothing. His eyes were on the parchment, but his mind was elsewhere, on a kingship he had never wanted, thrust on a boy who had wanted it even less. He imagined the faces of the lords who would have shouted the title the loudest. Karstark, Umber, Glover, Bolton, men who had fought beside him, bled beside him. Men who would not forget the humiliation of seeing their liege lord dragged in chains through a southern city. So the realm splinters further, Maester Aemon murmured. South of the neck, for crowns vying. North of it, another. The old dragons would have been amused, or terrified. Jon turned to Eddard. He thinks you still a prisoner, he said. He named himself king to avenge you. Eddard said, voice low. The war my silence was meant to prevent has come regardless. There is more, Aemon said. A note added in a different hand, smaller. It is personal. His fingers traced the parchment, finding the scrawl at the bottom. To my father, if ever this reaches him, he read. Know that I did not choose this lightly. They crowned me before I could protest. I mean to bring you home or die trying. The North will not forget what they did. Your son, Robb. The word son hung between them like a sword. Eddard took the parchment, fingers brushing the ink as if he might feel Robb's hand in its strokes. The words blurred for a moment, and he blinked hard. Robb has done what he thought he must, Eddard said at last. He has my blood, stubborn fool. There was pride in the insult and fear. He rides into a storm thinking only of the blow he wants to strike, not what will follow. Jon's chest ached. He needs you, he said. He thinks he's fighting to free you. I know, Eddard said. That is why his war is a tragedy. He fights for a ghost that no longer wears chains. He let the parchment fall back to the table. But he does not know. The Queen and her council will not be eager to trumpet the mercy they showed a northern traitor. Jon's jaw clenched. If I left, he blurted. If I broke my vows and rode south, I could. You could be hanged as a deserter, Eddard said sharply, cutting him off. And Robb would have one more ghost to ride for. You swore an oath, Jon. Your brother chose his war. You chose your wall. The gods must be laughing at how we all stumble into our roles. Maester Aemon's blind gaze shifted toward Jon. When I was a young man, he said, I watched my own kin tear the realm apart in the name of a throne. It is no easy thing to sit in black and hear of your blood in crowns and crowns in blood. His hand, gnarled and light, found Jon's arm. We are not always given the battles we would choose, Jon Snow, he said. But the wall has its own wars. And perhaps, in time, the choices you make here will matter more than any sword stroke in the south. Eddard looked at his son. What did I tell you on the wall? He asked quietly. First duty, then the rest. Your duty is here. And yours? Jon asked. Eddard's mouth tilted. Mine, he said, is to make sure that, when this war of crowns burns itself out, there is still a realm left for a king to rule, whether his name is Robb or someone else. The boy's name was Cobb. He had come to the wall in chains, wrists rubbed raw, eyes too old for his years. A horse thief out of the reach, the story went, though stories were often kinder than truth. Now he knelt in the yard with snow dusting his dark hair and shoulders, hands bound once more behind his back. Before him, the block waited, an ugly chunk of blackened wood half buried in ice. Jeor Mormont stood a few paces away, thick hands folded over the pommel of a plain sword. The brothers of the watch ringed the scene, some solemn, some eager for the break in routine. Desertion is death, Mormont said, voice rumbling. You knew that when you spoke the words. You knew it when you slipped away in the night and made for the King's Road. You knew it when we dragged you back. Cobb's lips trembled. My mother, he stammered. She's alone, M-Lord. No sons left but me. I dream of her starving. You thought the wall felt too cold, Mormont said. You thought fear of your own discomfort outweighed your duty to the brothers beside you. You thought wrong. He turned his head. Jon. The sound of his name in that tone made Jon's stomach flip. My lord, you once told me that the man who passes the sentence should swing the sword, Mormont said. Your father before you, I hear. Wisdom from Winterfell's Godswood. I've seen you clean Longclaw yourself after killing an ice spider the size of a dog. I wonder if you will keep that same care for a man. Jon felt every eye turn toward him. He glanced at Eddard. His father's face was grave, but there was no surprise in it. Lord Commander, Jon began. You are my steward, Mormont said. My right hand. If I had wanted another to swing the sword today, I'd have called him. Go on. He gestured toward the block. Let us see if you believe your own lessons. The world tunneled down to the path between Jon and the condemned boy. Cobb's eyes were wide, whites showing all around the pupils. Tears had carved clean tracks down his dirty cheeks. Jon stepped forward. His legs felt numb. Longclaw weighed heavier than any sword had a right to. Snowflakes caught in the dark wood of the hilt, then melted against his palm. He remembered Eddard Stark's voice from another yard, another winter, speaking to Bran as they watched a trembling man kneel in the snow. He remembered the stroke of the sword, clean and final. He had not understood then that the weight of that moment would someday be his. Cobb, he said. His voice sounded distant in his own ears. Have you anything to say? I'm sorry, the boy blurted. I am. I was afraid. I swear I'd not run again. Please, M-Lord. I'm no lord, Jon said. And if I let you rise, every man here will know that an oath to the wall is worth less than a warm bed in the south. Then the next will run, and the next. And when the wildlings come, when the dead come, there'll be no one left but ghosts to stand in their way. He swallowed. I'm sorry, he repeated. And he was. Sorry for the boy, sorry for the wall, sorry for a world that ground men into meat between larger stones. He looked once more at his father. Eddard's gaze was steady, neither urging nor forbidding. This, it said, is yours. Jon set Longclaw's edge to the line of Cobb's neck. The boy sobbed once, then bit it back. To his credit, he did not beg again. The sword fell in a clean arc. Silence followed, broken only by the thin patter of falling snow. Jon stood over the still body, chest heaving, breath steaming in the air. Blood soaked into the snow around the block, turning it a pinkish gray. Jeor Mormont nodded once. Let it be remembered, he said. That desertion is still death, even in lean years. The brothers drifted away, some thoughtfully, some already laughing at some grim jest. Only Eddard remained close as Jon cleaned the blade with slow, methodical motions, cloth turning red in his hands. "I hated that," Jon said flatly. "Good," Eddard replied. "The day you enjoy it, I'll know I failed you." Jon slid Longclaw back into its sheath. "In Winterfell, it seemed different," he said. "The man Father executed was older, harder. He'd seen battle. This was just a boy." "So were you when you came here," Eddard said. "Age does not erase guilt. Fear does not erase choice. Cobb chose to run. You chose to swing. Both choices carry weight." Jon stared at the stain in the snow. "You're going to tell me this was a lesson," he said bitterly. "It was," Eddard said, "but not the one you think. Ruling is not only about saving those you can. It is about knowing when you cannot save a man without imperiling many more. Mormont could have swung that sword himself. He chose you because he wanted you to feel the cost of the vows you swore, not as words, but as blood on your hands." "He used me," Jon said. "He used you," Eddard agreed. "And in doing so, he taught every man watching that Jon Snow believes the law applies to all, even when his heart rebels. They will remember that when you ask them for harder things." Jon looked up sharply. "You speak as if someday you'll ask men to walk into worse than a boy's blood," Eddard said. "You will. Whether you wear a black cloak or something else." They used a broken crate as a table and a sliver of moonlight as their lamp. The wooden map was one Eddard had drawn up by a handy carpenter, its gouged lines marking the wall, the King's Road, the rivers of the north. It was crude, but it would do. Jon moved a small stone south of the neck. "This is Robb," he said, fingers lingering on the piece. "Last we heard, he was at Riverrun, questioning who still stands with him." "And this?" Eddard said, tapping a darker, jagged stone near the trident, "is the Lion, Tywin Lannister. If I know him, he's not forgotten that a Stark army marches anywhere within a week's ride of his gold." Samwell shifted his weight, scrolls clutched to his chest. "The ravens say Lord Tywin has taken Harrenhal," he ventured. "Burned half the riverlands. Small folk slaughtered, villages razed. If that helps place him." "It does," Eddard said grimly. "Harrenhal is a statement as much as a fortress. He means to show the realm what happens when you defy his blood." He picked up a thicker piece of bone and set it near Dragonstone on the carved coast. "Stannis Baratheon," he said, "stubborn as a north wind and twice as cold. He will not forget Robert's trueborn brothers have a claim stronger than any golden-haired boys. He will think the crown his by right, and the realm damned for failing to see it." "And his brother Renly," Jon said, placing a more polished pebble in the south. "The ravens say he feasts in Highgarden, with the Tyrells at his back. 10,000 swords pledged to his bright banners. Renly will think the crown his because the crowds smile for him," Eddard said. "Charisma can win men's hearts, but it cannot keep the wolves from their doors when winter hits." Sam raised a timid hand. "And the dragons, my lord?" he asked. "The scrolls from the east. They speak of a girl with 3. Eddard's hand hesitated over the empty eastern margin. "We leave her off the board for now," he said. "Not because she doesn't matter, but because we know too little. For the moment, our board is cluttered enough." He looked at Jon. "What do you see?" Jon frowned. 5 kings, he said. "The boy in King's Landing, my brother in the north, the Baratheon brothers, and someone else across the sea." He gestured vaguely east. "Everyone reaching for the same thing." "And what does that mean for the realm?" Eddard asked. Jon thought. The wind tugged at the edge of the map. Sam huddled into his cloak, nose reddening. "It means every lord must choose," Jon said slowly. "Whose banner to follow, which crown to kneel to. Some will hedge, trying to wait and see who wins. Others will rush to whichever seems strongest. Villages get burned for not choosing fast enough, or choosing wrong. And while they burn? Eddard pressed. Jon's jaw tightened. While they burn, the real enemy marches, he said. The wildlings gather beyond the wall. The dead rise. There aren't enough men left to fight them because all the living are busy killing each other for a chair of swords. Sam made a small, distressed sound. It seems madness when you say it like that, he murmured. It is madness, Eddard said. I saw a different kind of madness when I followed Robert against the Targaryens. Then, at least, there was one target, one dragon to slay. Now there are too many heads and not enough swords. He moved a small, unassuming pebble to the wall. This is us, he said. A few thousand men at best, more crows than knights, perched on the back of the world with our beaks chattering. Tell me, Jon, how does this pebble affect all these grand pieces? Jon stared at the map. It doesn't, he said, then caught himself. Not yet. Good, Eddard said. You see it. For now, the realm thinks the wall a distant story. They don't imagine we matter. That is our curse and our advantage. He straightened, his leg protesting. My lessons to you are not just for some distant day when crowns are light. They are for this board as it shifts beneath us. Sometime soon, one of these kings will remember the north reaches further than Winterfell. When he looks north and sees a Stark here, even in black, he will think differently than if he sees only old bears and soured stewards. Sam glanced between them, eyes wide. You mean letters? He asked. Alliances. In time, Eddard said. There will be ravens to send, names to invoke, debts to call in. For now, Jon must learn to read this board not with his heart, but with his head. He tapped the wall pebble again. Kings rise and fall, he said. Dragons hatch and die. But if this pebble fails, all the rest are only ash in the snow. Never forget that when you are tempted to think of riding south to wear a crown. Jon looked at the little stone that stood for the wall, then at the jagged ones that stood for men who called themselves king. I won't, he said. He hoped it was true. The forest beyond the wall was a cathedral of ice and bark. Trees older than kingdoms loomed over the narrow trails, their branches thick with snow, their trunks furred with frost. The air felt different here, heavier, as if sound were swallowed more quickly. Ghost moved like a ghost indeed, white fur almost glowing against the underbrush, paws silent. His nose quested, his breath steaming. Every so often he would pause, ears pricking, then continue on. Keep your eyes open, Jon said softly to the men behind him, and your mouths shut unless you have something worth saying. Rast snorted but obeyed. Gren and PYP exchanged a quick glance, the kind that said they would make a joke of that later, when they were back within timbered walls. Eddard rode just behind Jon, not at the head, not at the rear. It was a deliberate placement, a silent reminder that he trusted Jon to lead, but was close enough to watch. The horse beneath him snorted, vapor puffing from wide nostrils. How far to the old weirwood? Eddard asked. Another mile, Jon replied. We'll camp there. The Ravens' reports say wildling fires have been seen in this direction. If they're near, we'll see some sign by then. Or they'll see us, Rast muttered. That's what your eyes are for, Jon said. Use them. They pressed on. The snow underfoot was crusted, crunching softly under boots and hooves. The forest was not silent. It held 1,000 tiny noises, the distant creak of branches, the scurry of some creature under the snow, the faint crack of ice in a nearby stream. But there was no birdsong. That absence lay on the men's nerves like a weight. Ghost halted at the crest of a small rise. The direwolf's body stiffened, head lowering. A low growl rattled his chest. Jon raised a hand. The column behind him stopped. What is it? Gren whispered. Jon slid from his saddle, Longclaw whispering as he loosened it in its sheath. He crouched beside Ghost, following the direwolf's gaze. Tracks. Not fresh, the edges had been blurred by wind, but clear enough. Bare human feet, more than one set, treading through snow as if it were summer grass. Here and there, a deeper gouge where someone had dragged something heavy. Wildlings, Jon breathed. A small band, Maybe a dozen. Heading where? Eddard asked, following the line of prints with his eyes. Northwest, Jon said. Away from the wall. Running from something, then, Eddard said quietly. Jon's skin prickled under his furs. Or toward, he said. The memory of blue eyes and cold flesh from old bears' tails slid down his spine. What do we do? PYP asked. There was a tremor in his voice he tried and failed to hide. Jon looked back at his men. 5 brothers, counting himself. 6 with his father. Enough to ambush a small raiding party, perhaps. Not enough to take foolish risks. We follow for a time, he said. At a distance. See what we can learn. If we can speak with them, we do. If we see signs of other things, we turn back. We're not here to be heroes. Eddard's gaze rested on him for a long moment, weighing that choice. Then he nodded once. You heard him, he said to the others. You follow Jon Snow's lead. If any man breaks from the line or looses an arrow without his say, he'll answer to me. They shadowed the tracks for another half-mile. The trail led them into a shallow hollow where the trees thinned. There, they found what the wildlings had fled. A camp, long abandoned, snow half covering the charred remains of fire pits. Scattered bones lay where they had fallen, pale sticks against the blackened earth. Not animal bones. Human. Gren swallowed audibly. They fought each other? He whispered. Look closer, Eddard said. Jon knelt, brushing snow aside with gloved fingers. The bones were scored in odd patterns. Some had been cracked open. For the marrow. Starving, Jon said. They were starving. And something ended their debate, Eddard said, pointing with the tip of his sword at a tree trunk, for parallel gouges rent the bark, deep and clean. No animal Jon knew Tor would like that. Ghost whined softly, pressing against Jon's side. We go back, Jon said. His voice sounded steadier than he felt. We mark this place on the map. The old bear needs to know. Whoever did this may still be near. No one argued. As they turned their horses toward the faint line of the wall on the horizon, Eddard let his mount fall in beside Jon's. You did well, he said. You had the sense to see when there was no victory to be had by pressing on. It felt like running, Jon said. It was, Eddard replied. Running is not always cowardice. Sometimes it is prudence, making sure you live to take a stand that matters more. A man who dies bravely in a pointless place leaves his people no stronger than before. Jon cast one last glance back at the ruined camp. They ate each other, he murmured, because they had no food, because whoever rules their lives failed them long before we found their bones. That too is a lesson, Eddard said. You saw the ledger with Bowen Marsh. This is the end of that ledger, when numbers are ignored or misread. Remember it. The chamber off the Lord Commander's hall was barely larger than a cell. It held a table, 2 chairs, a shelf with a few cracked cups and a jug of rough wine. The candle on the table spat and guttered, casting jumping shadows on the stone. Jeor Mormont poured with a meaty hand and slid a cup toward Eddard. You're making waves, he said without preamble. Eddard took the cup but only held it, letting the steam curl against his fingers. If I wished to avoid waves, he said, I would have let Joffrey's sword fall. Bowen Marsh made a disapproving sound in the doorway. He had not been invited to stay, but he had lingered after delivering a tray of bread and salt beef, like a servant who refused to admit he'd become one. I took you in because you're a sword with some use left in you, Mormont said, not because I needed another counselor sniffing out politics in my latrines. I'm not sniffing out politics, Eddard said. I'm trying to help you keep your wall from falling down around your ears, and to train your son to rule, Marsh said sharply. I've seen the way you bring him to meetings that don't need a steward, set him over quarrels better left to the officers, ask his opinions as if he were a lord again. The Night's Watch has no place for kings, Eddard Stark. We are all equal in our misery. Jon stood stiffly, feeling as if every word were a lash across his back. I asked to learn, he said. No one forced. No one needs a boy playing at command while we count barley. Marsh said. Your father will leave the wall one day, one way or another. Will you go with him then, little crow? Will all these lessons prove to have been about the Watch or about some other throne? Enough, Mormont said, his voice a low warning growl. He looked at Eddard, bushy brows bristling. Bowen isn't wrong to worry. The Watch stands apart from the quarrels of the realm. If it begins to look as though we're fashioning lords up here, not brothers, some king will remember we exist only long enough to snuff us out. Eddard inclined his head. I understand, he said, but I did not come here seeking to set crowns on Jon's brow. I came here in chains, remember? Any future beyond the wall is a story for drunken nights and old men's tongues. What I can do here and now is make your men stronger. You need officers who can think past their stomachs and swords. Jon has a quick mind, a cautious one. I would hone it and put it in your service. In my service, Mormont repeated. His gaze shifted to Jon. Do you mean to serve the Watch, boy? Or some other master? Jon met his eyes steadily. I mean to serve the realm, he said. And right now, that realm needs crows more than kings. My watch has begun. Whatever other truths my father hints at, they don't change that. Mormont grunted. Good answer, he said. Too good, maybe. Sounds like something the spider might have coached you to say. Eddard's mouth twitched. I never listened to Varys long enough to learn his tricks, he said. Any cleverness Jon has, he mostly taught himself. Or learned from the boy's mother, whoever she was, Mormont muttered. He drained his cup and set it down hard. All right, here's how it will be. Jon continues his duties as my steward. He may sit in on councils, settle disputes, count barley, all the rest. He may lead small rangings under supervision. You may advise him, Eddard. You may point out where he stumbles. But you will not fill his head with talk of crowns. You will not speak to him of kingly blood or hidden claims. Not while he wears black. The words hung between them like a test. Eddard's jaw tightened. He thought of Lyanna's eyes as she'd clutched his hand in that bed of blood. Promise me, Ned. I have kept that secret for 14 years, he said quietly. I can keep it a while longer. But understand this, Lord Commander. The day may come when the wall's survival and the realm's survival require the same man to stand in two worlds at once. When that day comes, you may be glad I began his lessons early. Mormont snorted. I'll be glad of any man who can keep his wits when the dead walk, he said. King, crow, or stable boy. Until then, we do this my way. He looked at Jon again. You hear me, boy? Your father and I may speak of high things in whispers, but your feet stay in the snow. You answer to me before you answer to any ghost of a crown. Jon nodded. Yes, Lord Commander. Bowen Marsh gave a last, sour look and left, shutting the door behind him more forcefully than necessary. Silence fell. I've made trouble for you, Jon said to Eddard. You've made yourself visible, Eddard replied. There will always be men who resent that. Here as much as in any court. Learn from it. Know when to speak and when to listen, when to push and when to let the current carry you. And if I misjudge? Jon asked. Then you will have stories to tell your son someday, Eddard said. If the world is kind enough to give you one. He did not say if the world is kind enough to still exist. The storm had blown in from the north, a white wall blotting out the sky. It beat against Castle Black's timbers like an angry hand. The common hall groaned under the assault, but its old bones held. Inside, men crowded closer to the hearth, bowls cupped in their hands, cloaks wrapped tight. Jon sat with his back to a pillar, the heat of the fire on his face, the chill of the stone at his back. Ghost lay at his feet, head on his paws, red eyes half-lidded. Beside Jon, Eddard nursed a cup of something that called itself wine if you were generous. This may be the worst vintage I have ever tasted, Eddard said, making a face after a sip. And I have drunk Dornish swill from barrels they swore hadn't been watered. Jon huffed a laugh. You don't have to drink it. On the contrary, Eddard said, it reminds me that I am no longer a lord. A useful lesson. Samwell snored softly against the post, his head lolling. The din of the hall made it somehow easier to think. Conversations blurred into a low hum, letting Jon's mind wander. "You said once," he began, "that Robert was a good man and a bad king, that he'd won his throne with a hammer and then let it rust while he drank and hunted. How does a man become that?" Eddard stared into the cup. The firelight painted hollows in his face, lines etched by worry and time. "Robert always loved the fight more than the prize," he said at last. "He loved the charge, the clash, the moment when all the world narrowed to his enemy's helm. Afterward there were councils and coin, laws to shape, wrongs to right. He found those dull. He appointed men he thought he could trust and left them to it, while he lost himself in wine and women." "Men like you," Jon said quietly. "For a time," Eddard said, "until I made the mistake of telling him the truth too plainly. Men who rule must hear truth, but they seldom like it. The trick is to make it go down like good wine, not bad." He swirled the cup, then set it aside. "Robert never grew out of being a warrior. Patience, detail, compromise, all the things that make a kingdom work bored him. He thought the realm would stay as he'd made it by sheer inertia. But realms are like children. If you don't watch them, they grow in ways you might not like." Jon considered that. "And you?" he asked. "Were you a good hand?" "I tried to be," Eddard said. "I paid attention to the ledgers, the small folks' complaints, the whispers in the alleys. I tried to keep the peace. I failed in the end. I underestimated Cersei's ruthlessness, overestimated Robert's willingness to act, misjudged Littlefinger entirely. A good ruler must know what men are capable of, not just what he wishes they were." He looked at Jon. "That is another lesson. Affection will make you blind if you let it. So will hate. You must see men as they are, not as you feel toward them." Jon glanced around the hall. Gren and PYP were arguing over dice at a nearby table, faces animated. Alliser Thorne sat alone in a corner, nursing his ale like a grievance. Bowen Marsh was nowhere to be seen, likely counting beans by candlelight somewhere. "How do you learn to see that way?" Jon asked. "By listening more than you speak," Eddard said. "By watching how men act when they think no one is judging them. By asking yourself, whenever someone tells you what you want to hear, what they gain from your believing it." He nodded toward the room. "Tell me what you see now." Jon looked, really looked. "I see Gren and PYP trying to forget they saw a boy lose his head this morning," he said. "They talk louder when their eyes drift toward the door. I see Rast drinking faster than he should. He lost silver to them at dice and he hates feeling foolish. I see Sam, sleeping where he knows no one will bully him, because they all know he carries the Maester's words in his head and the Lord Commander's favor on his shoulders." "And Thorne," Eddard prompted. Jon followed his father's gaze. "I see a man who resents that the world changed around him," he said slowly. "He fought for the Targaryens, then for the Night's Watch when they lost. He thinks himself better than half the men here, and he's not entirely wrong. But he lets that bitterness poison everything he touches. He'll obey orders, but never with grace." "Good," Eddard said. "You are learning." He picked up his cup again, grimaced at it, and set it down. "In time, you must learn to glimpse the seed of betrayal before it sprouts, and the hint of loyalty where you least expect it. All men wear masks, Jon. A ruler's job is to see what lies beneath without tearing the mask away too roughly." "And if he fails?" Jon asked. "Then he ends up in a black cloak on a wall of ice, teaching his bastard son the lessons he learned too late," Eddard said dryly. Jon smiled, a small, genuine thing. "There are worse fates," he said. "Sometimes," Eddard replied, and for the first time since he had knelt on the steps of the Great September, he felt that it might even be true. The cell Eddard called his own was little more than 4 stone walls and a pallet stuffed with straw. The lantern on its hook cast a weak pool of light, leaving the corners in shadow. In Winterfell he had slept in carved oak, under firs, the dire wolf of his house looming above the hearth. Here there was only rough stone and the faint smell of old smoke. Jon sat on the single stool, his elbows on his knees, hands clasped loosely. Ghost lay against the door, a living barrier, ears flicking at every sound in the corridor. Outside, the storm's fury had abated to an occasional moan of wind. "You've been patient," Eddard said. "More patient than I had any right to ask. I cannot tell you everything yet. There are still ears and eyes I do not trust. But you deserve more than hints." Jon's mouth went dry. "About my mother," he said. "Yes," Eddard said. The word felt like a stone dropped into a well. "About your mother. About the promise I made her." He looked down at his hands. They were scarred, knuckles knotted, nails rimmed with dirt that never quite washed out anymore. Lyanna's hands had been slim and sure, a rider's hands. He could see her now as she'd been in Winterfell's yard, dark hair whipping in the wind as she'd urged her horse over a low fence. "Your mother was Lyanna Stark," he said. Saying the name aloud here in this cold place felt almost like blasphemy. "My sister." Jon's breath caught audibly. She died," he said. "In the south, Robert." He spoke of her as if she were a lost dream, Eddard finished. "She was that to him. To me, she was a wild thing, born too fierce for the cage she was meant to occupy. When Robert rode to war against the Targaryens, he did it in her name, or so he told himself. He believed she'd been stolen, raped. The truth was, he shook his head, more tangled. He saw the questions in Jon's eyes and held up a hand. "I will not speak ill of the dead," he said. "Not now. What matters is this. Lyanna loved, and was loved, in a way that defied the lines men draw on maps and family trees. It left her with child. With you. When I found her, in a tower stained with the blood of her guards and her own, she was dying. She clutched my hand and made me swear." "Swear what?" Jon's voice was barely a whisper. "That I would protect you," Eddard said, "from Robert's wrath, from the realm's hatred of Dragonspawn, from anyone who would see in your existence a threat to their claim." She knew Robert well enough to know he would kill any child with Targaryen blood, no matter whose sister had borne it. Jon stared at him as if he'd spoken in some foreign tongue. "Targaryen," he said slowly. I mean that your father was not some nameless sellsword or stable hand," Eddard said. "He was Rhaegar Targaryen, crown prince of the realm Robert overthrew." The words hung between them, heavier than any chain. Jon stood abruptly, the stool scraping. "No," he said. That's not possible. Prince Rhaegar, people say they say many things," Eddard said. "Some true, some not. I was there when he died. I saw the hammer fall. I saw what his decisions cost the realm. I do not excuse him, but I will not let the songs written by his enemies define the whole man." Jon paced the small space, 3 strides one way, 3 back. Ghost lifted his head, ears angling toward him. "All this time," Jon said, "you let me think I was your sin, your weakness. You let Lady Catelyn, hate me. You let me wear bastardy like a brand. I had to," Eddard said quietly. "If I had claimed you as mine and then reared you with all the honor of a trueborn son, questions would have been asked. Better for the realm to think me a man who'd strayed than to think you a boy with a better claim to a dragon throne than any Baratheon." Jon laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "A better claim? I'm a brother of the Night's Watch. My claim ends at the edge of my sword." "As it should," Eddard said. "For now. That is why I agreed to Mormont's terms. Your duty is here, but duty does not erase blood, Jon. It shadows it. You needed to know. Not so you can run south and brandish your parentage like a banner, but so you can understand why men will try to use you someday as a symbol, or a weapon." Jon sank back onto the stool, as if his legs could no longer hold him. "What do I do with this?" he asked hoarsely. "For tonight," Eddard said. "You do nothing. You sleep if you can. Tomorrow you rise and fetch the Lord Commander's breakfast. You check the stores with Bowen Marsh. You help Samwell with the ravens. You train. You go beyond the wall when ordered and come back with as many men as you left with. And later, Jon asked. His eyes were too bright in the lantern light. Later, Eddard said, you carry this knowledge like steel under your cloak, hidden but present. You remember that every lesson in barley and blood, in maps and men, may be called upon by more than the Night's Watch someday. And you remember that whatever crowns the world throws at your feet, the wall came first. Jon was silent for a long time. Finally he said, do you regret it? Taking me in, lying for me? Eddard looked at his son, his sister's son, and felt the ache of years in his chest. Every war I fought, every man I killed, there are moments I regret, he said. But not you, never you. The lies I told have cost us both dearly. But I would pay that price again to see you sitting here, breathing, instead of buried nameless in some southern ditch. He reached out, for a heartbeat, hesitated. Then he laid his hand on Jon's shoulder. The weight of it was familiar and new all at once. You are my son, he said, not by blood alone but by choice. Whatever dragons sing in your veins, the wolf raised you. Jon bowed his head. For the first time since he'd taken the black, he let himself lean into that touch. Outside, the storm began to loosen its grip on the night. The wind's howl softened to a low moan. On the W, all sentries stamped their feet and cursed the cold, unaware that in a small room below, the future of the realm had shifted, almost imperceptibly, on the axis of a secret spoken aloud. In the silence that followed, with Ghost's steady breathing and the faint crackle of the lantern the only sounds, Eddard Stark continued the work he had begun on the ice above. He taught Jon Snow how to carry a truth that could topple thrones without letting it topple him first.